Zimbabweans are an important tool in forcing Zanu PF to accept the holding of free, fair, and credible elections. And until we have free, fair, and credible elections, they must stay. One of the most urgent democratic reforms that must be implemented in Zimbabwe as soon as possible will be to restore freedom of expression and a free media. Zimbabweans have been brainwashed so thoroughly, they cannot distinguish what is in their own interest and what is in Zanu PF's interest. One of the areas where Zanu PF's brainwashing has left its mark is on the economic sanctions imposed by the West on the party leaders. Ideally, the key thing is to establish ways of making positive contributions rather than criticizing without proffering sanctions, argued one Newsday reporter stoically, only for him or her to mud the waters by proffering a typical Zanu PF propaganda solution on the issue of sanctions. Mnangagwa must not wish Chamisa away, continued the report. He is a potent opposition political leader who was voted by nearly half of the voting population, and space must be created for him if the country is to achieve its economic goals or Mnangagwa his 2030 vision. It does not make sense, for that matter, be it Mnangagwa, Zanu PF, Chamisa, or MDC, to deny the legitimacy question or insist that sanctions on Zimbabwe should remain when other leaders, like South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa, are arguing Zimbabwe's case at meetings with other key Western economic bloc, demanding that the sanctions be lifted. It is disappointing that so many people are still confused about the sanctions, particularly those whose principal task is to inform and educate the people. If the rabbi of Rome is at sea, what hope is there for its followers? Zimbabwe's economic meltdown was not caused by the sanctions, but rather by the criminal waste of human and material resources through gross mismanagement and rampant corruption by Zanu PF. How can a nation sustain, much less prosper, a 15 billion revenue hemorrhage from diamond industry alone, especially a nation like Zimbabwe, whose GDP is a mere $10 billion? The corollary is equally true. It is naive to expect the country to register any meaningful economic recovery until the nation is cured of the cancerous tumors of mismanagement and corruption. And the medicine to cure the cancer is to implement the democratic reforms and hold free, fair, and credible elections. It was President Mnangagwa in the Zanu PF junta who corrupted the country's democratic institutions, hence the need to now implement the reforms. They corrupted them to impose the de facto one-party dictatorship and consolidate the party's iron grip on absolute power. Implementing the reforms will dismantle the party's patronage system, which is central to its retaining a tight grip on power but is also the root cause of the mismanagement and corruption. And hence the reason the party has resisted implementing the reforms and holding free and fair elections. The Americans have gone to town in explaining the linkage between holding free, fair, and credible elections and the lifting of the sanctions. 3 million Zimbabweans in the diaspora were denied the vote. There was no free public media. The regime failed to produce something as basic as a verified voters' roll, for Pete's sake. The conclusion is self-evident. Zanu PF failed to hold free and fair elections. And therefore, why should the sanctions be lifted? It is bad enough that reporters at Newsday are still, after all these years of the issue being discussed at length, failing to get their heads around the sanctions debate. It is a great national tragedy that someone as esteemed and politically powerful as Cyril Ramaphosa, the President of the Republic of South Africa, is himself lost at sea too. In 1986, a number of nations imposed sanctions on apartheid-ruled South Africa, just as sanctions had been imposed on white-ruled Rhodesia. The majority of blacks in both South Africa and Rhodesia supported the imposition of the sanctions as a necessary measure to force meaningful political change. So President Ramaphosa believed sanctions were necessary to end white tyrannical rule, but not necessary to end black tyrannical rule. It is no secret that South Africa is not exactly a nation with a booming economy and everything running smoothly. The country has blundered from pillar to post, from one corruption scandal to another. Yes, South Africa is nowhere near the political and economic mess one sees in Zimbabwe. But still, there is plenty for South Africans to start worrying about. It is, but on the issue of lifting the sanctions on the Zanu PF vote rigging thugs, President Ramaphosa is hopelessly out of touch with reality. That is